Andrew's kindly agreed to come and share the reading with us, and it's 1 Samuel 16, but we're just reading the last verse of chapter 15. So the reading is 1 Samuel 16, but with the last verse of chapter 15.
Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. But nonetheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord repented that he had made Saul king over Israel. The Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil, and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have promised me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take an heifer with thee, and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do. And thou shalt anoint unto me him who I will name unto thee. And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peaceably? And he said, Peaceably. I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Now sanctify yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons, and called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked on Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel, and Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent, and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look at. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants which are before thee to seek out a man who is a cunning player on an harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou wilt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants, and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse, and said, Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul, and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armour-bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favour in my sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him.
Thank Andrew for sharing the reading with us earlier. The context of the chapter that we looked at is quite a crucial time, isn't it, within the history of the nation of Israel. I'm sure you remember that they told Samuel that they now wanted to follow the pattern of the nations round and about them. They wanted to have a king. And God said to them, Samuel, it's not you they're rejecting, it's me. There was supposed to be a theocracy. God was the one who ruled. And yet they looked around at the other nations and they decided they wanted to copy them instead. And they were warned what it would mean if you take a king, the problems it will bring your way. And lo and behold, Saul becomes king. And very quickly he starts disobeying God's commands. Very quickly he starts assuming the role of, well, if I'm king, I can decide. And that's always the problem, isn't it? The more power you give, people sometimes want even more again. And we see it even in our modern age, don't we? There's lots of problems, isn't there, with people who are granted power and they think it means they're above the law. And they're not. And Saul thought that because he was king, if God said something and he thought different, he could do different. And God was patient with him. It wasn't just one mistake, but they were serious mistakes that he was making. They were things that God couldn't just turn a blind eye to. And so in the end, Saul had to be removed. But the reason I asked for verse 35, the last verse of chapter 15 to be read, is because I want you to understand that Samuel is no robot. And he mourned for Saul. He understood what it meant for God to turn his back on Saul. And it tells us in verse 35 that Samuel mourned for Saul. You see, everybody wants to have the voice of the prophet. There's not many people who want to have the heart of the prophet that comes with the message. And Samuel didn't just proclaim the word of God. Samuel felt compassion. Samuel cared. We pick it up then in chapter 16, and in the first verse it says, Now the Lord says to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him? God had to shake Samuel and say, you can't dwell in the past. You can't dwell on the pains of the past. You have to understand that there is a plan and a purpose for now, for the present. And God had a plan for Israel. And yes, Saul had failed, and yes, the past was painful. But Samuel needed to hear from God that he needed to allow the past to be the past and not to dominate his present. God told him, I have provided for myself a king. God already knew who the new king was going to be. And I'm quite intrigued by the fact that he decides to tell Samuel information bit by bit. Faith is a funny thing, isn't it? Because we say we live by faith, and yet so often we want to know everything. And God says, no, it doesn't work like that. Faith is about being obedient with the bit that God's already given you. And as you obey, and as you step forward, as you do the bits that God shows you, he shows you more. It's a gradual opening, it's a gradual revealing. He doesn't show us everything all at once. It comes over a period of time. Ever-increasing faith. And so he is told, first of all, to go down to Bethlehem. He's then told the family that the king is going to be selected from. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, because I have provided myself a king among his sons. So it's narrowing down, isn't it? Samuel's a bit concerned about the commission that he's given, because he says, well, what about if Saul hears it? You see, Saul is still on the throne. Yes, God has decided that Saul is not going to be king, but Saul isn't going to relinquish that voluntarily overnight. There's going to be a process, a transition, before that actually happens. But God has already decided who the new king is going to be. And Samuel is thinking, he's torn. How can I show loyalty to another king? What about if Saul hears about it? And so the Lord tells Samuel what to do. Go and prepare a sacrifice. Go down to Bethlehem, where Jesse lives, and ask for Jesse and his families to come and share with you in the sacrifice. And so he goes towards Bethlehem. And I know Martin has pointed out in verse 4, it says the elders of the town are trembling at his coming. Because the prophet of God turning up, it depends on your conscience whether you're comfortable with that or not. And they trembled. Are you coming in peace? And he reassures them, yes, it's okay. I'm coming in peace. And so Jesse arrays his sons before him, and they're brought before Samuel one at a time. And the first one, Eliab, was quite an impressive specimen. Because Samuel took one look at him and he said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. As soon as he saw him, he said, yes, Lord, I see why you brought me here. I'm looking at Eliab and I know this is the man who is going to be the future king. And then he's astonished because God says to him, no, it's not this one. And what was the mistake? That even Samuel, even the prophet of God that he was, even the man who walked so close with God, what was the mistake that he was making? One that we often make ourselves, isn't it? What did God say to him? Do not look at his appearance, at his physical stature. I refused him. The Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. God could see the heart of Eliab, and he could see that he wasn't the one. Yes, he might look impressive on the outside, but on the inside, you see, God knew him best. The fact that God sees into our very hearts, how does that make us feel this evening? There's one of two reactions, isn't it? We can either feel a bit uncomfortable with that because we know our own heart. God knows our every thought. God knows our every word. God knows our every deed. How does that make us feel? There isn't anybody else I would feel comfortable having that information. There's not a single person upon the face of the earth that I would feel comfortable having that kind of knowledge about me. But I'm comfortable with God having it. Because I know why God wants it. He wants it for my good. Yes, he sees my failings, he sees my mistakes. But he doesn't use them as leverage against me. He wants to work with me. He wants to work in me. And this is a wonderful assurance for all of us, isn't it? When we understand that God is for you, that God isn't there working against you, that God doesn't use his knowledge of you to make you feel small, to trip you up, to pull you down. God uses his knowledge of you to build you up, to make you stronger, to help you up. So the fact that God sees into the heart, it is a fact of Scripture. It is a truth. But it isn't something that we need to shrink from. It is something that we can comfortably embrace. Open your heart to him. He knows it already. Stop pretending that we can hide things from him. We can't. But let's be willing to trust him. Trust him with that knowledge. Trust him that he will be working for our good. So Eliab has come. He's been rejected. The second eldest, Abinadab, he comes forward. No, God says it's not him either. And then the third son is named Shammah, and he comes forward. The three eldest are named because they were the three which were the fighting age. They were the three who were old enough to be conscripted into the army. Because we read in later chapters that when David goes to confront Goliath, those 3 brothers have already been called up to the army. But God's thoughts are not our thoughts. God's ways are not our ways. And all the 3 that Samuel thinks are the prime candidates, God says no. Then 4 more sons come forward. So 7 of the sons of Jesse have been presented before Samuel, and now we hit a bit of a difficulty, don't we? Because God has said no to all of them. That's a bit perplexing for Samuel. He's been sent to go to the house of Jesse. The sons that Jesse has presented have all come before him, and God has said no to all of them. Who's made a mistake? When things don't work out the way that you think, are you tempted to think that God's made a mistake? Impossible. He's perfect. He cannot make a mistake. Who does Samuel ask for clarity from? He doesn't ask for God's clarity. He knows God's word to his soul. It's Jesse that he turns to. He asks Jesse in verse 11, are all the young men here? Are you sure this is all your children? Now this is a bit embarrassing, isn't it? It's a bit embarrassing really for Jesse, isn't it? Because Samuel is asking him, are you really sure all your sons have come before me? And Jesse is embarrassed because he has to admit that there remains one, the youngest. Doesn't even give his name. Yeah, well, there is the youngest, and he's there keeping the sheep. So why hadn't Jesse called him? He's one of his sons. He's been asked to bring all his sons. Why is Jesse not called David? Because even David's father doesn't think it's going to be him. It's incredible, isn't it? Even David's own father, Jesse, hasn't thought to include him as being a likely candidate that God is wanting to work through. Samuel says to Jesse, look, send and bring him. We're not going to sit down until he also comes. The Bible gives us a good report of David in verse 12. It tells us that he was ready, with bright eyes, good looking, and as soon as he walks into the room, the Lord speaks to Samuel and says, arise, anoint him. This is the one. This is the one. What do we learn about this particular incident in the Word of God? Well, we learn a lot about God, don't we? We learn a lot about ourselves. Why is God's word, God's leading, God's guidance, why is it so important to us? It's because only He knows. Very often in life we think we know, but we don't know. Sometimes we might be close. But God knows. God's knowledge is perfect. He knows. And sometimes the least likeliest is the one that God chooses. What do we read in the New Testament? For I have chosen the weak things of the world to confound the mighty, the foolish, to confound the wise. You see, God's ways are not our ways. God's thoughts are not our thoughts. So often we are guilty of assumptions. We assume things. But God knows. Jesse himself even assumed that David didn't need to be included. But he did. What does Samuel do with the anointing? In verse 13 it tells us Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. That's difficult, isn't it? This one who has been forgotten. God doesn't anoint him in secret. It's not done around the corner. It is done openly there with his brothers. Yes, this might be a surprise to the family. But David is the one that God has chosen. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David. What an incredible turnaround of events. He got up that morning and went looking after the sheep as he normally did. He had no concept, no understanding that on this day, the call of God to his life, his main calling, the purpose for him being here on earth, was to be revealed to him that very day. He had no inkling at all. We really don't know when God is going to break into our lives, do we? He can do it at any time. We can be sometimes going about the most mundane of things, and all of a sudden God challenges you. God speaks into your heart. Always be ready for God to speak, because he can speak to us at any time. Make no assumptions as to when you're able to allow him to come and challenge your heart. He can do it at any time of the day, any day of the week. God can speak to you. David was there going about his daily business, and all of a sudden he's called from the field, and without any preparation on his part, or any apparent preparation. I'll be careful with that, because God had been preparing David for years. But there was nothing on the outside that highlighted that day as being any different to any other. And yet this was the day when God was going to break in onto David's life and show him his plan. I'm not here just to give you a history lesson tonight. The God of David is our God. The God who had a plan for this young man has a plan for each and every one of us. Yes, it's not going to be the king or queen of the country, but that doesn't mean that his plan is any less important. Whatever it is that God has designed for your life, it's important that we give him opportunity to show us what he wants us to do, because he does want you to know. God wants to be known. God wants to be found. God's ways are there to be shared with us. He's a shepherd boy. How on earth does he make the step from being a shepherd boy to being a king? How is he going to even get away into the palace? Has he got to scheme this? Is it now up to him? Is the ball now in his court? Of course not. Stand still and see the salvation of God. God has given the call in, and God will make sure that everything works according to God's timetable. It's going to be years down the line before David ever sits upon that throne. But God has already marked his man. How does David start to interact with the royal court? Well, the remaining verses in chapter 16 tell us about this. It tells us that the Lord's Spirit departs from Saul. And somebody comes up with the idea, well, music is a good soother. Why don't we find somebody who's skillful on the harp and ask him to come and play? The person who comes up with this idea is one of Saul's servants, and we're not even given his name. He's an anonymous servant. Just tells us in verse 18, then one of the servants. But he's got a part to play in the plan of God. We don't even know his name. And yet, by him voicing what he felt within his heart, he helps the plan of God to be fulfilled. One of the servants answered and said, look, I've seen a son of Jesse. This is verse 18. I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite. He's skillful in playing. He's also a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. That's a nice commendation, isn't it? He's musically minded. He's a mighty man of valor. He's prudent in how he talks. He's also handsome. But most important of all, God is with him. God is obviously with him. What a wonderful commendation that is. Do you know what strikes me? This stranger, this anonymous servant, has a better inkling of the character of David than his own father did. That's quite amazing, isn't it? Even his own family didn't see these attributes, and yet here is this anonymous servant, and he's saying, look, if you're looking for somebody who's good on the harp, well then I can recommend David. But he's a lot more than just a harpist. He's got other qualities as well. And this man was obviously a godly man, because he takes time to observe that God has been with David. He's already seen it for himself. So then you find this incredible account where Saul, who is the rejected king, is sending for David to come and attend his court. Now in the natural, you would think that God would keep David and Saul far apart. You would think for safety's sake, best not for them to be in the same place. And later on, they need to be kept apart. But here at this junction, the will of God is that David should be close to Saul, even though Saul has been rejected. Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." And Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them by his son David to Saul. Verse 21 tells us, David came to Saul, stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. The very person who was going to take his place on the throne becomes his armor-bearer. Isn't it lovely that David could be trusted to be loyal? He's not going to scheme his way to the throne. He had opportunities later to kill Saul by stealth, and he turned it down. He said, "It's not for me to do this. It's not for me to make the plan work." Oh, what a lesson we can learn here. So often we think we need to give God a nudge. So often we think God needs our help for his will to be performed. There's a line in a song that Cal and myself were listening to a couple of years ago, and it said this, "Lord, please help me not to get in the way of people coming to you." What a way to think. Lord, help me not to get in the way of people coming to you. Because if we're not careful, we can get in the way. Make me a vessel of your peace. The vessel has no glory. It's what the vessel contains. We have no glory, but we contain God. We have this incredible treasure in earthen vessels, as I believe is something that was mentioned this morning by Phil. It's so true. We must allow more of him to be seen. The prayer of John the Baptist, "I must decrease and he must increase," is the prayer of every Christian. To allow God to be seen, to show forth God, to show forth the love of God. David came to Saul, stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. Saul sent to Jesse, saying, "Please let David stand before me, for he has found favour in my sight." So it was, whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul, David would take a harp and play it with his hand, and Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distress in spirit would depart from him. What an incredible way for David to be introduced to the royal court. Absolutely incredible. Isn't God's plans, as we look back on them, aren't God's plans so amazing? Yes. Why do we ever doubt him? He is such a wonderful planner. He weaves things so well. We need to be available to him. We need to be obedient to him. Yes. Even Samuel, even godly Samuel, we hear in this chapter that he's still learning. That God is still teaching him. We see with young David that God is beginning to rise him up. God is beginning to bring him out, that he might start to do the works that God has for him. But let's think about our own situations. Let's think about our own service. Let's think about our own hearts. Was David called because he was perfect? Was he going to be the perfect king that Saul wasn't? No. He wasn't a perfect king at all. Through his sins, many people died. Through the judgment of God, thousands of people died from his sin. He wasn't chosen because he was perfect. And yet God says David has my heart. You see, whenever Saul was confronted with sin, and this is something we'll have a little look at next week, whenever Saul was confronted with his sin, he always blamed somebody else. He always said, it wasn't me, God. It's somebody else's fault. Don't blame me. The big difference with David is that when David was confronted with his sin, he asked for forgiveness. He confessed his sin. God doesn't choose us because we're perfect. He chooses us because he loves us. God wants you to be used in his service, not because you're perfect, but because he has a work to do. He wants us to be real with him. He wants us to be honest with him. But he is the loving Father. Quite a few of the hymns and songs we have sung tonight have reminded us of the cross. And we always need to remind ourselves of the cross. Because it is at the cross where our relationship with God starts. It is at the cross where our sin is forgiven. Don't ever lose sight of the fact we are all sinners. It's just some of us have been forgiven and some of us haven't. At the cross, our relationship with God starts. But he has a plan and a purpose for each and every one of us. And if we're willing to listen to his voice, God will show us what he wants us to do. But then we still need to be obedient. And David needed to embrace the calling of God to his own heart. And if you read through the chapters, you will see that he proved God privately. He proved God as a shepherd. When he faced Goliath, again, something we'll have a look at next week. When he faced Goliath, it wasn't his first battle. He faced Goliath with confidence because he already knew his God. I thank God that he has a plan and a purpose for each and every one of us. Yes, we might not be David. Maybe we're the anonymous servant who's going to put a good word in for somebody at the right time. And that will help God's work. That person is important. And he's mentioned in the scriptures, but we don't know who he is. But we know that he was obedient to the leading and the voice of God.